Langston Hughes and Audre Lorde, despite being black creators, come from two staunchly separate time periods. As I dissect Hughes's Spittoons of Brass, published in 1928, and Lorde's Who Said It Was Easy, published in the early 1970s, I will come to the conclusion that they are essentially scrutinizing their individual positions amongst a predominantly white society, but achieve the same goals in doing so. By reading these two works together, the audience is granted a wider view of the concept of double consciousness. This is a phrase that deals with the multiple aspects of a black American in light of their identities and their clashing backgrounds. While it may not be noticeable upon first reading, Lorde and Hughes's works scrutinize the concept of double consciousness, which was coined by advocate W.E.B. Du Bois. It is explained as describing the individual sensation of feeling as though your identity is divided into several parts, making it difficult or impossible to have one contained identity. Furthermore, it is asserted that since American blacks have lived in a society that has historically repressed and devalued them for so long, it has become difficult for them to unify their black identity with their American identity, both of which were explained in the article Understanding W.E.B. Du Bois's Concept of Double Consciousness by the blog Kristen Does Theory. I will now read Hughes's poem, followed by a small dissertation, and then I will read Lorde's poem. Clean the spittoons, boy. Detroit, Chicago, Atlantic City, Palm Beach. Clean the spittoons. The steam in hotel kitchens, and the smoke in hotel lobbies, and the slime in hotel spittoons. Part of my life. Hey, boy. A nickel, a dime, a dollar, $2 a day. Hey, boy. A nickel, a dime, a dollar, $2. Buy shoes for the baby. House rent to pay. Gin on Saturday. Church on Sunday. My God. Babies and gin and church and women and Sunday, all mixed with dimes and dollars and clean spittoons and house rent to pay. Hey, boy. A bright bowl of brass is beautiful to the Lord. Bright polished brass like the symbols of King David's dancers, like the wine cups of Solomon. Hey, boy. A clean spittoon on the altar of the Lord. A clean, bright spittoon, all newly polished. At least I can offer that. Come here, boy. Hughes kickstarts this piece by highlighting the rampant subjugation of African Americans on the East Coast in this country, particularly by touching upon these touchstone cities. He pinpoints these exact locations as they were experiencing considerable peaks in their economy at the time of writing, and were not greatly affected by the adverse conditions of the post-World War I economic downturn that affected much of the other parts of the country. This, in turn, led to significant increases in the populace of black citizens. Chicago is currently undergoing a great migration of African Americans. However, this was preceded by the Chicago Race Riot of 1919, which set a great precedent for the rest of the decade. It preceded everything with racial violence, and the 20s weren't really about that. It was kind of all of the African Americans reacclimating themselves to a new area from the South. This decade proved to have an exponential boost in industry after the war, vastly increasing the job market and the allure of all of these cities, while simultaneously bringing in 6 times the amount of African Americans than Detroit had before. This led to a prosperous period of African American cultural influence in all of these different places, but it had been preceded by a year struck with the turmoil of the deaths of African Americans in 1919. The country's post-war recession had little effect on Detroit, Palm Beach, Atlantic City, respectively, because they were buoyed by either the American automotive industry in Detroit or their popularity with tourism. Likewise, these cities also had dramatic influences in black Americans that were looking for job opportunities. Yet, this list that Hughes incorporates into the beginning of his poem is bookended by the demeaning attitude mainstream Americans had for their black workers: clean the spittoons. This brief phrase, accompanied by a list of cities, epitomizes the distaste white citizens had for their black peers. Aided by Hughes's knowledge of the cities, but were not outright explained, Hughes anticipates a certain awareness on the behalf of the reader. The demeaned worker in this poem must also vacate the steam from hotel kitchens, the smoke that lingers in hotel lobbies, and the slime in the hotel spittoons. This is also indicative of the wider gamut of jobs that African Americans had to take on. These rooms, they're all part of the hotel, but the hotel as a whole is an image that represents the leisurely enjoyment of privileged white Americans that were looking to have fun. It also focuses on the ways that they systemically chose to ignore and obfuscate their own areas of society. Much like their mentality for races, they do not care about the remnants of destruction they leave behind. Note the obscuring nature of the words steam and smoke and slime. What is left over after their actions is to be cleaned up by someone else, someone usually less fortunate, in order to maintain their theoretical superiority over them. It is, unfortunately, as he says, a part of the worker's life. Boy is also reiterated throughout the piece, sometimes from the perspective of possibly another African American, sometimes from the perspective of somebody using it in a demeaning fashion. Typically, a white man is the voice that is used. It's commonly associated with ownership. It is frequently offset by the modes of independence the narrator partakes in, but is still ultimately under the thumb of someone else. This man barely has enough money for any kind of his necessities that he lists, let alone any meager entertainment offerings aside from gin. In this era, bathtub gin was very popular, which is likely what Hughes is referring to. It was a cheap, accessible, easy method of obtaining alcohol that bootleggers frequently resorted to as well. All of the workers' different sectors of life seemingly converge on Sunday, either because his bills are due or because everything converges at church. Babies and gin and church and women and Sunday all mixed with the dimes and dollars and clean spittoons and house rent to pay. Again, this man can barely survive in the financial state he's in, but the money that he has, he wants to bring to church, to give in the name of God, but he can't. A bright bowl of brass is beautiful to the Lord. The alliteration here further accentuates Hughes's point after lamenting on what this man is not allowed to do. Sometimes the work that you do is all you have to offer. He goes on to compare it to the bright and polished brass of biblical legends. Brass, in the context of the Bible, takes on two pretty different connotations: stubbornness in the face of sin, or strength. Hughes uses these biblical connotations to denote the two-sided nature of this man's work. It's illustrative of the institutionalized racial sensitivity from the white man's side and the black worker's willingness to carry on in the face of adversity. At least I can offer that. The poem ends with "Come here, boy," insinuating he's perpetually locked in this cycle, week after week after week. Spittoons of Brass is certainly interested in this notion. Hughes builds it into every aspect of the poem. Yet, we see this man exhibiting commitment and pride to his day-to-day life, not because he has it the best, but because he will not let his spirit be crushed. It is a difficult, but it's not an impossible way of living. The inclusion of those various American cities is not a coincidence. They were about to be on the cusp of a transformative racial makeup from the influx of African Americans. This group of people still found light in their situations and worked to better improve themselves in this country every day at the time. Hughes looks forward to a promising future where the black man isn't confined by the context of his own race, but by what they do as individuals. Accordingly, Hughes illustrates his fondness for black creatives creating from a black perspective. This can be seen in his very famous piece, "The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain." This clarion call for the importance of pursuing art from a black perspective was not only the philosophy behind much of Hughes's work, but it was also reflected throughout the Harlem Renaissance. In this piece, he incorporates aspects of class difference, African American subjugation, black self-worth in the midst of racism, and also how the power struggle between white and blacks were at the time. These are all pertinent issues to both poets, as we will see when I pivot to Audre Lorde's, who said it was so simple. This piece is more gender-centric, but it is still written through a similar lens to Hughes's, as Lorde's skin, color, and sexual identity all coalesce. While there is more happening, it stems from Hughes's approach of the black individual being put down by existing oppressors. And here's the piece. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Nedick's, the women rally before they march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first, and the ladies neither notice nor reject the slightest pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex. Sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations. This is a brief piece, but it has particularly strong direction and intention. It prefaces the emotional current throughout the piece by discussing the many different nodes of anger. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. With a reference to the production of fruit from a tree, Lorde implies this emotion can be precarious, but at times overwhelming, that she can barely discuss it. The women that are about to attend a march for themselves sit in a restaurant and talk about their employees, which gives them a certain amount of freedom and privilege. A waiter, described as almost white, does not stop to tend to the black patron that has already been waiting there and goes right to the girls. Though they are at the same race, perhaps since he is almost white, he has a greater freedom of motion in his life as he can take on the semblance of a white man. And the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. These women do not have to worry about being prioritized and are bound to a form of slavery. This is an interesting take on the term that instead focuses on their dedication to a system that neglects others so they may succeed. This is also indicative in the way that they hire women that insinuates these women are now free through them keeping them there to work. It also seems like a reference to the fact that they hire other women to do their work for them, further alluding to them occupying a metaphorical master role. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex. Lorde's unique position only places greater attention on slights like these. She doesn't choose a side or fight for one cause, but instead she's for every kind of person that is not viewed equally. For she, a gay black woman, faces many dimensions of diminishing respect, especially in the early 70s when this piece was penned. She closes out the poem with a question posed to the audience and herself. And sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations. She ponders, sure, these women may get preferential treatment, but what about him? What of all those underrepresented individuals who deserve to be treated justly? Is it possible for all of these groups to succeed, or can society only tackle one of them? The vagueness of this question looms over the entire conclusion and sort of the rest of the piece. It fits in with the author's indescribable rage. This place adds an extra dimension to itself by being critical of those who view feminism from only one angle. In this case, it is from the perspective of a well-to-do group of white women. According to Virginia Marr, Lorde identifies aspects of her identity that make her unable to approve of such a conditional form of feminism. Not only is this just one more facet of Lorde's identity, but it also plays into the concept of double consciousness, which is seen in both pieces that we've discussed so far. This poem places a spotlight on the oppressed and deals in hypotheticals to a greater extent than Hughes's work, but still, both pieces look to a mysterious and unknown future. What will become of my identity? My many different identities. Will it be better than it is now? The aspect of communal unity for the black individual ties these two authors together. Things are not as black and white as they seem. There's always something that can be done to benefit yourself and your society at large. Both Lorde and Hughes, through their creative outlets, push to inform the uninformed and bridge the gap between the many different peoples that are not equal. So, even though they come from seemingly different angles initially, these two poets of different generations achieve the same goal. They are both concerned with those that they identify with, illustrate their struggles, and hope that soon it will be better for all African Americans.